Everyone, welcome to Wattpad to the big screen. We've got an incredibly accomplished panel to start us off. And let's get into some really quick writer intros for you all. I believe right below me, we have Amber Chen. She's a author from Singapore and has a diploma in film and TV screenwriting. She writes in the genres of science fiction, historical, and contemporary. In her free time, she consumes copious amounts of KC dramas and music, and also drinks one too many cups of bubble tea. Amber is also a Pitch Wars 20 alum and Wattpad star, and one of her Wattpad novels, The Cutting Edge, was recently adapted for TV. Then we have Beth to my bottom right. Beth is an author and creator, best known for her series The Kissing Booth, which is adapted into a series of hit Netflix movies. She began her career by self-publishing The Kissing Booth on story-sharing platform Wattpad at 15 years old and earned a 3-book deal with Penguin Random House at 17. Her 10th book and debut new adult novel, Lockdown on London Lane, is due for publication in February 2022. She blogs about writing advice and being a 20-something as a self-confessed nerd who loves to review movies on Instagram. Kate, to my right. Kate Marchant is an American author of young adult and new adult contemporary fiction. Born and raised in Oakland, California, she began writing on the serialization fiction platform Wattpad when she was just 15. In 2017, she graduated magna cum laude from the University of Southern California with a degree in creative writing and a minor in art. After a brief stint at a startup and a few years working at a private school, she now lives and writes in San Francisco. Her debut novel, Float, is being adapted for the big screen and will star Robbie Amell and Andrea Bang. Now, let's dive in. I think a really important question, and kind of why we're all here as writers. It really comes down to story. So, would love to hear from you three. Why did you start writing? How did you get started? And what steps did you each take to kind of best position your story to succeed? How about Kate? Let's start with you.
Okay, I found Wattpad in 2011, I think. I found it after I used Quizilla, which was kind of the big storytelling platform when I was 14 years old. I was a big reader growing up, so Wattpad was kind of a blessing in disguise for me and for my parents because they spent a lot of money on books for me. And I started writing, I think, a year after I joined Wattpad, and I kicked it off with Float, which is a classic contemporary YA rom-com, very much inspired by who I was at 15, which was very anxious, really just no filter, and the book kind of really connected with people, and that's how I got into this.
Yeah, fantastic. Beth, Amber, let's go with Beth.
Yeah, I mean, I think my timelines are very similar to Kate's. I found Wattpad around 2010, 2011, started posting The Kissing Booth 2011. I was 15 years old, and I just remember it was the first time I kind of thought of myself as a writer, because I've always really loved writing stories ever since I was a little kid. And then I, discovered Wattpad, where I figured there's a whole other community of other young writers like me who like this thing that I thought was a really weird hobby to have. So I started posting The Kissing Booth, and it just really took off. Like I never expected the kind of response that I got for it. So it won the 2011 Wattie Award for teen fiction that year, and I thought that was going to be like the peak of my writing career at that point. And then I obviously got the publishing deal, and then the Netflix movies followed, along with many, many more books.
Yeah, absolutely. Amber, how about you? How did you get started writing?
Well, I took a bit of a long journey. So I actually started out in theatre. So when I was in school, I did a lot of theatre work with writing for the stage. And then later on, I actually moved into screenwriting. So it's another completely different area of storytelling. And because I'm based in Singapore, so the opportunities for screenwriting aren't as many as I would like. And that's how I came upon Wattpad, and I decided to move my stories to novel format to be able to share them with a wider audience. That was back in 2012, 50, I think. So yeah, and that's where I am now.
And now it's a series.
Yeah.
Really quick before I get to the next question, I neglected to mention we actually have a promotion going on to anyone watching. If you write in the chat, "We thrive together" with your Wattpad username, we are giving away 100 Wattpad coins randomly at the end of this. And if you could also, if you have any questions, there will be a brief, if we have time, brief Q&A portion at the end. So feel free to hit us up in the chat. So moving on, guys. You start writing for the love of writing. When did you first kind of, when did somebody or first learn that someone might be interested in your stories for adaptation? When did you realize that you kind of really had something? Amber, sorry, I don't know if we're going to do a kind of one by one, but yes, please, Amber, would love to hear kind of when you first realized that you'd written something that people were really interested in, and what was it like being approached?
Well, I think it was back in 2019 when someone from Wattpad Studios first sent me an email saying that there was this mysterious opportunity. And I was like, I have no idea what's going on, but sure, I'll hop on a call with you to find out. And that was when they told me that they had interest in, that there was a broadcaster that they would like to pitch my story to. So, well, at that point in time, the Cutting Edge didn't actually have, well, what you might consider a significant number of readers on Wattpad. So I was quite taken aback when I got that offer. And they said, well, yeah, we're going to let you sign this shopping agreement, and then we're going to pitch your story to the broadcaster, and then we'll see what comes out of that. So, yeah, it was quiet for a while after that. And then they said, oh, we have interest, and they want to proceed with making the adaptation of your story. And then that's when it all started taking off. So it was a good a year and a half in production after that. Yeah.
Yeah. Kate, was that a similar experience for you? Getting a mysterious call from Wattpad?
Yeah, well, mine was a mysterious email. I think at that point, my second book was on contract with Wattpad Books. So it wasn't totally out of the blue, but I had kind of written off Float as something that was the project I wrote as a teenager, and finally finished 8 years later. It did really well early on, and I think I got a bit of stage fright with it. And I only really circled back to finish it up after I had graduated from college. And I thought, okay, nobody's going to want to see another project from me until I finish up Float. Everybody wants me to finish it. So I kind of said, okay, it's done. We did it. It's fine. It's good. It's in the past now. And then I got an email that Robbie Amell was interested in making a movie and had a lot of interest in my book. And I thought, that's a joke. That's never going to work out. And it was same as Amber. It was a couple months of, I signed my shopping agreement and then sat and thought, there's no way they're going to do anything with it. I'm sure he was just being nice or something and doesn't actually like the book that much. And then I got a follow-up email that was, the deal has closed. And then it was several more months of pre-production stuff. And I think we finally just finished filming this past month. So we're still in the process, but it was a lot of sitting around and waiting for more news.
That sounds like the development process to a T. Beth, how about you? Because I believe when you were approached about the Kissing Booth, this predated Wattpad Studios as we know it.
It did, yeah.
What was your process like?
So I remember the first time I actually thought someone might want to see a movie of my book was, I was still posting the Kissing Booth on Wattpad, and someone commented, you should make a movie of this. And I was like, that's never going to happen. I can't just make a movie of my book, but here we are 3 movies later. And it was a case of, for me, this was pre-Wattpad Studios and stuff. So after I'd sold my the book rights to a publishing house, there was a small UK-based production company called Comics who already had links with my publisher, and they reached out a couple of months after I got the publishing deal initially. So this was early 2013, it must have been. And they said, you know, we're really interested in your story and the Kissing Booth. And like, they were especially interested that it had been on an online platform, which they thought was quite unusual because it was at the time. And I sort of had a couple of offers from, or a couple of Hollywood agent types who reached out saying they were also interested, but I was advised go with this smaller company because they're probably going to only invest in the stuff that they're really serious about seeing through. So that was what I did. That was the advice that I followed. And I felt like I could really trust these guys. We kind of, it's going to sound really cliche and British now. We met for a cup of tea in Paddington Station in London to discuss the whole thing. And I just felt like they really understood the audience, the story. They were really passionate about it. So I signed the option with them, which I think is just the UK version of saying shopping agreement, which is, for anyone who's not aware, like where you kind of basically rent out the rights to the company for a little while, and they kind of have the opportunity to then go off to studios and things like that and try and get scripts and funding and then make it all happen. Which it didn't until I think about late 2016. So like Amber said, it was a lot of waiting around and a lot of, you know, just kind of waiting for another phone call before you get to hear something's happening. They're going to make the film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always feel, I think many of our viewers here feel the deal process is very opaque. You mentioned a shopping agreement. Did Amber or Kate, did either of you have to sign anything? Was that process scary? Did you seek outside legal help? What was that like for you?
Well, I wouldn't say it was scary, but we just received, I guess, this agreement, formal looking contract thing from Wattpad Studios. That's it. They had lots of details about what they were going to do with the work and what I would essentially be giving Wattpad the right, only the rights to shop the AV side of the house, I think, and then I would retain all rights for other parts in my story. So if I wanted to, I could still sell other rights, like the publishing and so on and so forth. Yeah, so it would be for a fixed period of time in which they would be able to take my story and pitch it to anyone who's interested. And after the time period lapsed, I think it was 2 years, then after that, I was free to take back everything if there was no interest, and then I could just move on with my story however I wanted to. Yeah.
Kate, is that similar to your experience?
Yeah, the shopping agreement is definitely just a it's basically an agreement that Wattpad is going to try to pitch your book to partners, different types of partners that I think that can include publishing partners, but primarily right now I think it's studios partners. So looking at production companies that might want to option the rights. I think in the US it's you sign the shopping agreement with Wattpad and then you sign the option with somebody if a publishing partner or a film partner is interested. And then if the option works out, you actually go on and you sign the deal that sells the rights. And I don't know the intricacies still. I think I'm kind of rolling with it. I ask my talent manager a ton of questions all the time, and she is very patient with me. But yeah, the shopping agreement wasn't scary to sign, I would say, because I mean, from my end, I had already told myself like Float is my old project. Whatever happens with it is perfect, but I'm not as emotionally attached. It's not like this is the end all be all, which I think was honestly a good attitude to have. I feel like the whole process can be very slow. And I mean, we've all had it work out for the best, but a lot of stuff that gets optioned never ends up getting made or is in pre-production for years and years. So I think if you are asked to sign a shopping agreement, definitely celebrate, definitely, tell your parents, enjoy it. But it's also just kind of one step in the process. So I didn't think of it as that big of a deal at this time. I thought, well, this is good. Like the ball is rolling, but we're definitely not at the end of the process at all.
Yeah, I think you just hit, all of you actually to a different degree hit on a question that I was going to ask, and feels covered. And it's like, what is that feeling of after your material has either been optioned or you signed a shopping agreement, that kind of period of waiting, what that feels like. So it sounds like you all had a very universal experience in that regard. So I got a question. Once a studio, production company, whomever came on board, whether that's Wattpad Studios, comics, Netflix, whomever, how involved are you in the early stages of development? And we actually have a question coming from one of our viewers that falls into this. Were any of you a part of the script adaptation process?
So I was kind of pretty hands-off personally, but that was partly because over the length of time that it took, I was kind of finishing getting my degree at university and then going into my first job because I kind of wanted to build a career outside of writing as well. And I was like, I kind of need to focus on these other things, and I trust you guys. And also, I know nothing about the whole movie making process, so I'm not going to try and step on your toes and jump in and insist on doing things as well, because it was very much like a learning curve for me. So my kind of input for all three of the Kissing Booth films was more or less limited to some early discussions with our brilliant director and scriptwriter, Vince, and then giving some feedback on first drafts of the scripts and things like that. And then I was out on set for sort of short periods of time while we were filming, but I kind of didn't have any input to what was going on. But that was sort of the level that I'd, from the start, kind of set the bar at, and sort of the expectation that I'd set for everyone as well.
Amber,
I think if it happened again, though, I might want to be a bit more involved the next time around. Now I know a little bit more about what's going on.
Absolutely, especially being on your 10th novel now.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Amber, would you say that was a similar experience for you working on Slow Dancing?
I think I was a bit more involved, I would say, and I was very grateful for the opportunity. I mean, I always wanted to do screenwriting, so I tried not to step on their toes. But so for me, what happened, because for me it was a TV series instead of a film. So at the start, they sent me the show Bible, which is how they basically broke the story up into different episodes and short blurb on what the production house wanted to put in each episode. And then I had a call with the production house and the broadcasting studio to give my feedback on what I thought about the show Bible. And that was when the screenwriting team had a chance to kind of clarify parts of the story with me as well. Things like character motivations, the significance of different scenes. And then they went back and started work on the actual scripts. So when that happened, they sent me drafts of the scripts. Like, I think there were 2 rounds of it. And then I could give my feedback to each episode script. And then they locked down the scripts and went into filming. So the actual filming part, I was pretty much hands off, and I was quite happy that they allowed me to go down to set to take a look at what was going on. And then after they wrapped up filming, that was when they sent over drafts of each episode. So I could give another round of feedback on how the editing was and whether there were scenes that were done well, things that I thought could be worked better. And there were 2 rounds of episode drafts before the actual show day, so to say.
Yeah, so you got to give feedback on the whole thing, start to finish.
Yeah.
And going to set, that's got to be awesome. Kate, I believe you just went to set as well.
I did. I got to go up to Canada for the first time in my life. We were filming up in kind of the Squamish area, just north of Vancouver. Very, very picturesque, very pretty. But going back to kind of the hands-off aspect, I was, from the beginning, I think I told people, you can do whatever you want with it. I'm not emotional. It's not my baby anymore. Obviously I love the story, but I kind of from the get-go was like, I know that a movie production is definitely going to change things. And I got lucky enough that I was a big Robbie Amell fan. I really like his rom-com work, especially. So from day one, I was like, I trust you. Do what you want with it. This is going to be really fun for me to watch. And our director and co-screenwriter, Sharon Lee, is a very, very talented Asian Canadian woman, and she brought herself to the project completely. I mean, it's kind of like reading an AU version of Float. It's older, it's based in Canada, and it's really fun to watch for me. So I was very hands off, but I got sent the script, asked for feedback and notes. I spoke with the director one-on-one, and she wanted to make sure that she was, honoring the story. And because the original story is set in Florida, and I had to tell her that I, at 15, had never visited Florida. I just picked somewhere as far from California as possible because it was kind of this escapist story. And she totally got the vision of the story and made it her own. So I was more than happy to be hands off, but they did invite me up to set. So I got to meet everybody, which was really wild. I think actually meeting the actors and, like handing them a copy of my book and that kind of stuff was really, really cool. But I didn't want to really put in input. I didn't have to, honestly. I think it was handled so well that I got to kind of sit back and enjoy it, which was a really nice experience for me. I'm sure I'll have projects later in life where I'll think, please do it right. Like I have to nitpick. There are certain things that you just have to get right. But luckily for me, this was a project where I knew it was in good hands and I didn't care too much about a lot of the details. So it was kind of a nice experience in that front.
That's great. Kate, you really touched on my next question and answered so beautifully. Beth, I'd love to hear from you kind of, in this development process, a huge part of it is trust. It's trusting that your partners will honor your vision, will honor the material. Would love to hear kind of what, in your experience, your partners did to kind of give you that trust and make you feel safe that they would honor the original intent.
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it, it's weird because I don't think I could put my finger on like any particular things that they did. A lot of it was just kind of gut reaction and just that feeling of kind of connection and yeah, you get it. With the production company, the guys sort of that I signed the option rights to, they talked a lot about the audience and kind of where the story had started and kind of what they felt had maybe been an influence on it or where they saw it going and like some of the main themes in it. And for Vince, the scriptwriter director, he talked a lot about kind of the heart of the story, the characters and what he saw as the main themes for it. And there was just something about the way they talked about it. I felt like they had passion. They got where I was coming from with it. I just felt like they really cared about it, that I could kind of entrust them with it. And I feel like I personally feel like I made the right choice.
I think we can all agree with that. Amber, how about you? What was that like for you with slow dancing?
Well, for me, I think you do have to put your trust in the production team to some extent. And then as a writer, when you sign the agreement to let someone else adapt your work, you are in a way putting the final say on what the final product is going to look like in someone else's hands. Well, to bring my 42 chapter story into an 8-episode drama, a lot of it has to be cut out. I mean, there is absolutely no way you could squeeze every single detail the exact way I had written it into the final TV series. So,
yeah,
I mean, it was hard for me to let go of some parts and to watch it change, but that's what the process is like. It's not going to be possible to see the full book that you wrote in its exact same form when it comes out on screen. And as a writer, I think that's something that you do need to be mentally prepared for, and you just have to trust that because it's a different medium, that these people who are professionals at screenwriting do know what would turn out best for your work. And as long as they understand the essence behind your characters, your plot, that they will be able to produce something that is representative of what you had intended in the first place.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic point. And I'd love to actually keep this with you for a second. So knowing that, adaptation, from a novel, whether that's a book, whether that's Wattpad, wherever, knowing that an adaptation is never a one-to-one, print to screen, were there any elements that, you felt were additive, that they added to the process that you loved, or were there parts that they took out that really upset you? What were your favorites, and give us some likes and dislikes?
I think they did pretty well in adapting my story to an entirely different setting. So my story was actually set in Korea, and then because we're obviously not going to film in Korea, so they had to change certain parts to make the story more suitable for the Singapore context. And I think they did pretty well with that. And I was quite surprised to see how they changed certain elements about the character's background to make it feel quite natural. There were certain dramatic scenes that they had to take out because it wouldn't make sense with like the kind of compressed timeline that they had on the TV series. Like there was this dramatic like press conference, I'm gonna slap your face scene that a lot of the readers loved, and I loved because I like that kind of like dramatic points in stories, but it just wouldn't make sense. So, pretty sad, but it can't help it. If you want to see it, you've got to read the book then.
That's great. You all should read the book. Kate, how about you? Were there any parts that you were very sad to see go? Were there any elements that changed from print to screen that you felt really worked?
Yeah, so I think a lot changed. I knew going into it that the movie would be different, and I think I was honestly kind of hoping for that because I did feel like Float was started when I was 15, and it was very on brand for kind of 2011. It had that the bad boy next door kind of deal. And on one hand, I'm still a sucker for that kind of YA setup, but I was like, oh, I'm not going to be the target audience for the movie, I felt. And then I started getting kind of what they were going to do with it, and I saw the script, and it was very different, but somehow felt very much in the spirit of the story. So much of like the essential stuff that wasn't, like the detail level, like names and place things, it wasn't that was preserved. It was kind of just like the purpose of the story and the emotional arc of the characters. And so much of that was adapted in such a nice way that it still feels it's still very much Float, but it's also that I get to have this cool distance from it. It's a more diverse story now. You've got all these really talented people who have kind of brought themselves to the table and added to it, and I think made something that's better than I could have done on my own. I think that's kind of the beauty of a movie, is that you do have all these people who really do know what they're doing. And on one hand, I could be sad about some of the things that got taken out, but I'm just too excited about the stuff that got kind of put into it, or the stuff that just got strengthened. And I'm like, yes, exactly. That is what I meant to do with that. And they did it better. So yeah, I think there's always going to be an element of the story that gets let go when it's being adapted. And I think you have to embrace and get excited about what the movie will be. And then remember that like the story itself it's still your story. It's still your book, baby. So it's never going to be a perfect match, but it can get pretty darn close.
Beth, would you say you had a similar experience with the kissing booth?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like there were a lot of scenes that kind of felt very true to the book, and there were ones that didn't. And a bit similar to what Kate was just saying, I remember when I read the script for the very first time, like I devoured it on the train home from London, and I remember texting my dad to say, "This guy writes my book better than I do. Like, why didn't I do these things? This is amazing. Of course my characters would do this." And like one of the big things they added to the kissing booth was sort of the dance mania machine, which people really loved and responded to, and that obviously became a bigger element in the second film, whereas it wasn't in the second book at all because there was no dance machine in the second book. And like the second one kind of diverged a little bit more, but that was one where I felt they kind of hit all the main beats, like all the emotional core of it. And you still felt that same kind of emotional roller coasters that the characters are going through, the same tensions and dramas and all the good points too. And I think that was more important to me than kind of saying, no, you must have this scene where the characters do this exact thing, as long as it kind of, still felt the same and kind of, had the same outcome at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like in all of your experiences, it almost takes on a life of its own once you get inside that collaborative process. So in the end, as you're watching your project come together, as you're getting to go to set, do you ultimately, and I feel like I know the answer, but I want to hear it all from you. Do you ultimately feel as though your vision was honored? Are you happy with the result? Do you feel by the end of it, it's something that you and the fans of the original stories can be proud of?
Yes, full stop. That's it. That's the tweet.
Definitely.
That's fantastic. I think now we actually have time for some audience questions, and we're getting a few that revolve around the same area. It's more in the earlier stages of development in writing. Are there any things that writers looking to be adapted can do to kind of shape their story around any devices or styles that might make adaptation easier in your experience?
I feel like I'd struggle to answer this question because my experience is so limited to what has been adapted from my stuff. And that's just kind of, I don't have any kind of formal writing training or anything beyond English lessons at school. So it's very much just a case of I write as I want to write. An editor helps by the time it gets published. But yeah, I don't think there's any kind of particular devices that I've used from that perspective, thinking this is going to be what helps it sell either as a book or as an adaptation. I think it very much depends on the genre though, because like, for instance, my book is YA rom-com, which is quite dialogue heavy typically. And that's kind of how the story is, and I guess feeds in with the movie as well.
Kate, when you started writing Float, we have a question from the audience. Did the story start off as a very serious thing, or has it improved significantly in these 8 years?
Well, I've definitely become a much stronger writer in the course of 8 years, I would say. But I think the book started off as serious as it could for me. I mean, I took it seriously. It was very much, it wasn't, oh, I'm starting, a silly little bad boy rom-com project and it's going to be silly and it's just for fun. It was very much channeling a lot of emotion, very escapist fiction. I was quite a quiet high schooler. I loved books. I mean, you can see a lot of like Sarah Dessen and Jenny Han in Float. It's very much coming from a real passion for a specific type of story. But of course, I don't think anybody sets off, especially when you're 15, nobody sets off to write a book thinking like, I hope this gets made into a movie. Like, let's do it. Let's nail. I was lucky enough that I knew enough about like 3-act structure just because I read so much that Float naturally took on kind of this nice, neat 3-act structure because it's Wattpad and it's serialized. I think it was much longer. So I always knew that it was going to need to get chopped down a bit if it was ever going to be published, if it was ever going to become a movie. But I think there was a lot of it came from, I guess you could call it a lot of study. I did read a lot of the genre that I was trying to write. So as much as I can joke about the fact that I started writing this project at 15, I do think there was an element of being serious about it. I do think I was quite dedicated as I could be at that age with my lack of experience. I was dedicated to making something that I was proud of and that felt like one of the published books that I loved. But obviously having 8 years of time to kind of develop my writing skills before I went in and gave it an ending was really beneficial. I think whatever ending I gave it when I was 15 would not have been as strong, especially because the character arc really is that this girl Waverly goes from feeling totally out of place, super anxious about where she stands in the world and who she's supposed to be. And it wasn't until I had my own, character arc and kind of figured out who I was that I was able to circle back and be like, okay, I know how this ends for her. I think if I was 15, she would have ended up completely the same as she started the story.
That's beautiful. The book grew with you.
Definitely.
Amber, I got a question for you. Coming from a screenwriting background, in writing The Cutting Edge, was there any kind of, design, like a cinematic eye that you applied to this, with like with the hopes of adaptation, or were you writing a novel just to write?
Well, I think it's a bit different for me because I started with screenwriting. So I would very much like every story that I write to have adaptation potential. And that is my ultimate dream, to see it on screen. So I would say yes, to some extent. I probably started writing The Cutting Edge slightly differently. Yeah, in my mind, it does play out a bit like a TV series. So how you would imagine like maybe a 16, 20 episode Korean drama would be. And that requires you to write it slightly differently from a novel 3-act structure that Kate was talking about. Like, I do plan each chapter to have like a cliffhanger ending that you would see for TV dramas. And I guess that also reflects in the reader's comments when they say it reads like a TV drama. So the structure is a bit different, and you do have to have like a higher number of kind of climaxes in order to have that kind of cliffhanger type endings per chapter. In terms of writing, because screenwriting is actually quite different from how you write a novel. When I was doing my screenwriting diploma, the lecturer said it's really hard to teach novelists how to write for screen because they tend to like to put in lots of descriptions. And he's like, no, you can't do that because we don't need that. I just need to know what the camera sees, and that's it. So to some extent, that probably influences the way I write my novels. When I first started writing in prose format, I did have a problem with head hopping, which you can do in your script because the camera can just pan from one character to another quite quickly, but you can't really do it for prose. So these are some things that I had to tweak along the way so that people reading my novels don't kind of get whiplash from all the different angle switching. Yeah,
Going from the omniscient movie camera line of thinking into the more, how do I get inside my characters' heads in a novel? Absolutely. We have another question from the audience. Were any of you worried about your story being lost in adaptation? We have some writers who are fearful that maybe their their story kind of being whitewashed, or they could lose sight of the original vision. Did any of you have fears in that regard, or and if so, how were they possibly assuaged? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
I think from my perspective, it came down to like the trust I put in, like I said, the producers and the script writer and director, and kind of how I felt they were passionate about the story and the characters and what their take on it was. I think if I hadn't had that initial trust, then it would have gone differently, and that we would have had more discussions about it, or I might not have signed the option in the first place at all.
Yeah, it's really in talking to the people who are looking to adapt and trusting that they're going to be proper shepherds and guardians of your work. Now, we talked a little bit about kind of your involvement in looking at treatments, looking at scripts, giving your thoughts on all those. People are wondering, did any of you guys have any say in casting and who might be involved in your movies and shows?
I did. Well,
Amber, please tell us.
I did. Well, I didn't upfront. I didn't know that I would have a say, but so I didn't say, I want this actor or that actor to begin with. But they did send me casting tapes of the few actors that they were looking at for all the characters, so I could give my input after seeing. So they would send tapes of these actors acting out a really short scene from the script, and then so I got to kind of give input on who I thought might be best for the role, and that was all very exciting.
Yeah, that's got to be really cool to see, in success on screen. So here's one, kind of a two-parter. Once you guys kind of found out the big news that your show, your movie is going to go ahead, how did you celebrate? And then, once the champagne's been popped, people are wondering, once it's out, do you look at criticism, or on the reverse, how do you avoid criticism, or do you engage with it? Beth, let's start with you. What's it like? Well, first, how did you celebrate knowing The Kissing Booth is going to be a movie?
I mean, it's really hard to celebrate when nothing's really happening. So you usually as well, when you sign the rights, you can't announce it straight away. In my case anyway, it was a case of wait until the article's out, and then it was wait until we announced that Netflix are doing it, and then that actually got leaked to the press, so that was completely taken out of our hands. And then people say to you, well, what's going on with it? What's going on? And you're like, oh, I don't know, stuff. And then you get to go to set, and then the film still doesn't come out for another year or so. So it's this really stretched out process where there's lots of really exciting moments that you often can't talk about, which makes it really difficult to celebrate, because you're just oh, yay. What do we do? I want to throw a party and I want to shout this from the rooftops, but that's kind of difficult now.
Which step is the real party step? Because it's all part.
Well, for me, that was when the movie came out. But for the first film, there wasn't really a premiere on it or anything. And then we might be able to do it for the second one, but it was released during COVID. And the third one obviously came out earlier this summer when COVID's obviously still around. So actually, I have celebrated all three by staying home with a bottle of champagne and a takeaway pizza, basically attached to my phone, seeing what everyone's saying on Instagram and Twitter, which I guess is the critics' point. And I don't I'll have a look at a couple of things, but only if they kind of crop up on my feed, and I don't go seeking it as much as if someone tags me in it, I'll take a look. And I just think there's obviously people out there who enjoy it, and a lot of the kind of critical response will be, from a critic's point of view. And I think, well, at least with the book, I never set out to make some kind of like great literary thing. I was just doing something that was a bit of fun and a bit of escapism. So as long as that's what people are getting from the films, and everything is worked out A-okay.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely the healthy way to go about it. Amber, was that your experience with Cutting Edge?
Yeah, I think it's probably quite similar. Like, I don't actively go out looking for comments. Well, if my readers, they do like leave comments on Wattpad sometimes, and then I take a look. But it's so far it's been very encouraging. I think they're all like really sweet people who just saying that they're just really happy to be able to see it, and then they're happy for me, and that's been very nice to read, I think. So I wouldn't say I've encountered anything that is particularly harsh at the moment.
That's great. I think that all comes from a great audience and a great community. Kate, we can't watch your movie yet, but have you celebrated, or are you kind of inundated with any hype?
I'd say I've had a pretty similar experience to Beth, where because it's just such a multi-step process. I think, like, obviously the initial email was a lot of fun to read out loud to my mom. I was like, because she knows Robbie Amell, so I was like, Robbie Amell's interested in my story. And then of course, the deals started coming through and things started moving. And unfortunately, both of my parents are lawyers, so it wasn't, they were like the two people that I could actually share news with along the way. And they were, of course, like, let me see the contract, we need to go over it, like, we've got to be sure that it's the real deal and that kind of stuff. So it wasn't so much as a big celebration, so much as like, okay, business meeting, time to sit down at the dinner table. But I think I'll probably celebrate quite a bit when we have a premiere of some kind. I think going to set was probably the most emotional I got. I think seeing how many people, and then meeting so many of the people that were actually working on the project, and kind of mentally connecting the idea that there are people who have spent a month or more of their life completely dedicated to, the book that I wrote when I was 15. I think there's something so humbling about that it's kind of hard not to celebrate it a little. It's not so much as it's not like a pop the champagne celebration so much as like having a little tearing up moment to yourself. And then, yeah, hopefully we have a premiere and I can really celebrate at that point. But the process was so slow, and we haven't, I've been following on social media people's reactions, and I think as far as like criticism goes, again, I'm so detached from Float at this point. Like, I can respect what it is and what it is for me, and I can tell you what's good about it, but I can also, as my editor knows, I can tell you what I'm going to do better in my next book, that kind of stuff. So for me, a lot of the criticism I see is criticism that I also kind of agree with. I think now that I have an English degree, it's very easy to kind of sit back and be like, yeah, I could have ended that act better. Like that story beat could have been stronger. It's my first book. It's the first full-length novel that I ever wrote. So I think criticism bounces off you better when you can take it and acknowledge, no project you ever write is going to be perfect. As long as you're not doing harm with anything, criticism is not a reason to get upset.
Yeah. That's again, another very mature, and I think it's the right way to go about it. So you all each have either another novel out, or are planning your next novel, or into writing your next novel. We do have some writers that are curious. Are there any kind of pratfalls that now, with your experience, you may want to avoid, or any tropes you may want to avoid, or certain things you feel like you want to write towards? Kate, you had mentioned, having a 3-act structure in mind when you originally wrote Float. Are there any like little bits of advice you can give our writers?
If you're writing for the aim of TradPub, be kind to yourself and just look into 3-act structure, because I do think a lot of, especially YA books right now, tend to follow really tight 3-act structure. Wattpad and writing for Wattpad is a lot of fun, but I do notice that my stories on Wattpad get much longer. You kind of repeat story beats, you circle back, and you do your second act kind of over and over because there's always so much to explore. You can always write more, I think. If you're thinking of TradPub, you probably want to kind of study the TradPub market too. Obviously, if you're writing on Wattpad, you should also be studying the Wattpad market because you need to know how readers are kind of interacting on Wattpad and what they want out of a Wattpad book. But yeah, reading up on 3-act structure, I mean, I was lucky enough that I kind of did it with Float, but when I was trying to edit my second book with Wattpad Books, it was kind of a nightmare because I hadn't followed 3-act as closely. It gotten more serialized. So there was a lot more that I had to chop, a lot more that I had to combine to kind of boil it down and get it to what TradPub wants in a book. So if I can give anybody a word of caution, it's definitely, study up, think about what market you're going to land in, make it much easier on yourself.
Absolutely. Amber, what about you as a novelist and screenwriter? What are you looking towards writing next, and do you have any tips for our up and coming writers?
Well, I do write quite differently on Wattpad versus off Wattpad. So I am concurrently pursuing trad publishing. So I'm working on some books with my agent, but that's very different, as what Kate said, to what I might put on Wattpad. So my Wattpad books do tend to be long. The cutting edge was like 140K. I've written books that have gone up to 200K. Those would never cut it with any publishing house or any agent. They would just say no. If you write YA in traditional publishing, you would probably need to look at a word count of just 70 to at most 90 for a debut. So none of those Wattpad stories that I put out there would ever have made it through the traditional publishing gates. So it's two different aims for my writing. And I think if it would depend as a writer, what you want to see come out of that story. Like, I do appreciate the kind of freedom that Wattpad provides that allows me to pursue these more long form, in a way, stories that I can just go on forever. And then readers who enjoy it also don't want it to end. So that works for both of us. And it did work out that one of my stories became a TV adaptation. But if you do want to see your book on a shelf, or maybe even like get picked up by Wattpad Books, which is going to trad publishing, then there are some guidelines that you would need to research and try to keep to. Yeah.
It sounds like we have a pretty consistent theme so far. Self-edit and save some of it for the sequel. Beth, do you have any other pearls of wisdom to add on to that?
I mean, my advice is much more loosey-goosey. My favorite bit of advice to give is always write the kind of book you want to read. Because the big pitfall that I fell into after getting traditionally published was that I thought I had to take myself very seriously as a writer now. And that totally backfired on me because that's not how I write. And I really struggled, and I wrote like nothing for years because of it. And then as soon as I just started writing for fun again, which I actually did via fan fiction, I was like, oh yeah, I really like writing. This is so much fun. I can do this. So for me, it's very much having fun with it, experimenting a bit as well. So like my 10th book, which is actually being published with Wattpad Books, because I published it on Wattpad during the first lockdown. It was like a collection of 5 short stories of different apartments in the same building all on lockdown, kind of like a quarantine Love Actually. And that was something very different to what I'd written before. You know, it was one story, one setting, but 5 different protagonists, all kind of slightly intertwined. And that was something completely new for me. And the book that I'm working on now as well is, again, it's just a different structure, and it's just something that feels fun and a bit different, but right for the story that I want to tell. So, yeah, I think my advice is kind of do what feels fun as well, and what you enjoy, just because that way you're more motivated to actually see it through and finish it, and also to champion your book and kind of keep pushing, even if, you know, you are submitting to agents and publishers and things like that, and you're not maybe getting the initial response that you were hoping for, because sometimes it does take time to find the right person to say yes to it.
Absolutely. Well, that's fantastic. I think it's like a really great place for us to call it. Write from the heart and write what you want to see. Thank you all so much for taking this time and for really kind of demystifying the whole process. And we can't wait to see Float come out in theaters. Everyone go watch Cutting Edge and all the kissing booths. And can't wait to see who in our audience comes up with the next great movie or TV show for us all to watch. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
you.
What is Writers Connect?
It's a community of writers helping other writers.
Most of us are Wattpad stars.
And that's the connecting thread.
Thanks for sponsoring us, Wattpad!
But we are writers first. It's what we do.
We write every single day.
Well, some of us do.
So we've decided to hold our own author convention.
We have panels organized by writers with topics we want to talk about. Genre panels like romance, new adult, and vampires.
Industry panels like serial fiction, the craft of writing,
how to get an agent and keep one.
And we have author meet and greet sessions all online.
We don't just talk about it, we live it.
We're not a panel of experts selling books about how to do things.
We're writers, just like you, and we have experiences to share.
So connect with us. Maybe you learn a thing or two.
We write together, we thrive together.
Writers Connect, November 5th through 6th.